was going to introduce you, but you're already here. This is great. Can you all pretend that Phil's not up here for just a second? All right, I just want to say, when I first got here, I opened it up to some of my volunteers to come and meet with me, get to know me, and let me get to know them. And one of the very first people to reply was Phil Lindau, and we sat down to coffee and got to know you, and just a terrific guy. So it's my very great pleasure to welcome up for tonight's interview, Phil Lindau. Thank you. And can I invite you to take a seat for the opening? We're staying in character. Sorry, Jason's not here this week, so
his rules don't apply, right?
Right, exactly. So Phil, when I first met Phil, he told me a little bit about what he does. He's a commodity trader. He said it's very interesting. It's very fast-paced. It's risk-taking and all sorts of cool things. So I don't really know anything about commodity trading, so I went and I talked to his friend Steve Michael, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. And so I talked to him. I was like, what is it that Phil really does? And this is a direct quote. Lindau's whole business is built on smoke and mirrors. And he's added no tangible value to society whatsoever. What do you have to say to that?
You've got to pick your sources a lot better than that. Lesson number 1 is, if you need some self-esteem building, don't go to Steve Michael. Lesson number 2 is, never believe anything that he says. So I have been accused of that for him over the years. That's not true. I've had a really great business life. Many of you know that I've been involved in a business for a long, long time, and it really starts, though, my business life starts differently. It doesn't start the day I got a good job or the day I did something well. It starts from the things that I had nothing to do with. And I think anyone in business eventually figures this out, and in life figures this out. We were born in America. I had great parents. I was able to go to college. I married a woman who completed me, and I needed a lot of completing. And I ended up getting a job. And your first job is like, you think you want to do something, you're not quite sure, but it prepared me to do a lot of things that I didn't even know I wanted to do. So every step of the way, God leads, and you can't always see the path. You can't always see when you're hitting a wall or when you've encountered an obstacle that you can't get past. I've had moments when the business almost failed. A couple different times, but you learn in every one of those instances. And at the end of the day, you see God's hand in everything that you ended up becoming. In terms of my business life, I'm sure everyone has a story like that, but I see God's hand in everything that has happened to me.
Awesome. So we have quite a few students in the crowd tonight. So Phil, can you tell us what you were like in middle school and high school? Little background.
So I went to Bloomington Jefferson High School. I was in middle school there as well. And I lived in an era when you could actually play 3 different sports. So I played basketball, baseball, and I played soccer. Soccer was really my first love. I
think we've got a picture. Phil playing soccer. Wow.
I started playing soccer when I was 5 years old in 1967, and I played until I was 27 when my body wouldn't handle it anymore. But I like soccer because it was not scripted. It just flowed. And back then, if you got one parent per student to come watch you play, that was a lot. So you didn't do it for anything other than you enjoyed the game, and that's why I played soccer. But where's the picture again? Put the picture back up. I didn't talk about it.
Can we get the soccer picture again?
So look at this.
Those shorts.
Look at the form. Hands, perfect. I'm following the ball. The ball's coming to my head. That's what you're supposed to do. That's technically perfect. Jumping as high as I could possibly jump, which was not very high. But the most important thing is to see where my butt is on the small of the back of the guy next to me. The next frame, I'm sure, was him sprawled out. And the next frame after that was the referee blowing the whistle. So there were a lot of technically really good things that were all negated by my butt.
Oh, good.
And then I was also I did a lot of things in youth group. I spent a lot.
I believe our next picture of Phil is from your vacation this last week, right? Can we get that next picture?
It could be.
Yeah, this is just last week, right?
So it's always shocking to see yourself 30 pounds lighter. Really is. That's always shocking to me. But I spent a lot of time at church. And for all the guys in my confirmation class this year, check this out. This is my confirmation certificate. I was at church a lot, so if you want to touch this and feel it later, I'm going to have it along, just so you see where I spent some of my youth. That's pictures from the Boundary Waters, and I went up with youth group every year to the Boundary Waters. That picture was from 9th grade, and I went with the high school. I wasn't supposed to go, but I really thought it would be fun, and I went, and I was a little gullible as a 9th grader. I trusted people way too much. So we loaded up to our first campsite, and our guide said, okay, everyone, get your stuff unpacked, and then the showers are, see that path there? Just keep going, and you'll find the showers. And I honestly believed him. I had a buddy along. We were really gullible. So we pitched our tent, opened our bags, got our towels, and we went through the woods. And it took us a little while to realize, not right. So when we got back, all the camp was standing out there applauding us for our naivete. It was profound.
And I think we got one more picture of you, Phil.
So this is just to show that I volunteered for a lot of dumb things in my life. This is my high school commencement speech. So I did clean up, and I actually had to give a speech to a few people. So that's high school was great. I loved high school, and then went off to college.
You obviously can't handle giving speeches at all. No.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of your background. What does life look like for you right now?
I probably have worked a little too much the last 10, 12 years. My wife, if I could see her, she would be nodding her head. I have worked a little too much. I like to go to the gym. I coached soccer for 20 years. I coached my sons. One of the biggest thrills for me ever was to coach my sons in soccer for 15 years until they were done playing. And then I came back for more. I coached for another 5 years just because I love kids and I love soccer. And as my working life will wind down at some point, I think I do need a few new hobbies.
That's awesome. So as a follower of Jesus, we've got #followers, our Lenten series. And as a follower of Jesus, what are you passionate about?
One of my favorite verses for a long time has always been John 13:34, where Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so must you love one another. If you do this, then people will know that you are my disciples." So I'm not a great evangelist. I'm not a very spiritually connected to people and say, here's Jesus, follow him. That's not me. But what I can do is love people. What I can do is have relationships with people. I'm the guy who goes to the restaurant, and when you hear a foreign accent, you ask, where are you from? How did you get here? What's your story? I love to hear those stories. And, they're kind of all around you. Just depends on if you're willing to ask the questions. So I think when I do that, I'm inviting people in to share their life story with me. And I love to do that. I got lots of great stories about, sometimes it takes different directions. Once I was there was a woman at my work who's Muslim. She cleaned the building. I'm usually there at 5 o'clock when she's showing up. And I got into a nice rapport with her. I really enjoyed talking to her. And she showed me pictures of her baby, and I showed her pictures of my granddaughter. All sorts of fun things. And then one day it struck me, I'm probably not ever going to have a connection with a Muslim person this close, maybe ever again. Hopefully not, but maybe never again. So I had her come in and sit in my office one night, and I asked her, tell me 3 things that really excite you about the Muslim faith. And she had several things that she relayed to me. And she asked me, well, what are 3 things that really excite you about Christianity? And that's one of those, I have actually given this answer many times because I have thought you need to be ready with the answer. So my answer was, I'm a sinner, and I'm in need of a Savior, and my Savior is Jesus Christ. And my second one was, I think that God has a plan and a purpose for my life. I just need to work hard to try to find out what it is. And then, the third one was, if I read the Word and if I fellowship with other believers, I might better answer the question, what would Jesus do? And I'd like to be able to know what would Jesus do. And those are my three things. Well, we had another nice chat, and she told me right then and there, she said, tomorrow I'm going to bring you a Quran. And I said, okay, tomorrow I'm going to bring you a Bible. So her and I exchanged the next night. So here's my Quran. And I spent a little bit of time, it's not very hard to Google hardest parts of the Quran. And I actually wrote her a letter. I don't understand these things about the Muslim faith. Can you explain them to me? And she said she would bring them home to her husband and they'd work on it. And I said, if you have questions about what is Christianity, please ask me what they are, because I'd like to explain them to you the way that I understand them. And that's kind of about where it ended. She ended up not being able to work the night shift at that building anymore. Her name was Amina. So I hope I have a lot more connections with Aminas in my life. I think if you're open and available and willing to ask questions and have relationship with people, probably will find more than you think.
So as I've gotten to know Phil, he's got a lot of stories. And Phil, do you have a story that you feel just hasn't quite played out yet?
I do. I've got several, but I'm going to talk about one, and I have to walk around because it's a really sad story for me. And you know what? Why does anyone watch the Indy 500? You're waiting for the crack up, right? You're waiting for the crash. I can tell you, I tell this story 8 times out of 10, and I'll cry. So here's the crack up. Will it happen this time? You can wait for that. I'm sure you'll all be listening because you want to see if the crack up happens. In 1990, I met a young man named David who was 8 years old. I remember the year because it was the year that my son David was born. A friend of mine and I had talked forever about being big brothers. And, everything came together. He was excited to do the same thing. We both got a big brother in 1990. Mine was David. And David was, it was a Hennepin County program. It was, we didn't really understand one program from another. But David was from the inner city. David lived in North Minneapolis, and he was Native American. And we spent a lot of time with David, my wife, my sons. We spent a lot of time with David for the next many years. He was fun to have around, became a part of our family, came to church with us when he was around on Sunday. David's mom had chemical dependency issues. David's father committed suicide in prison before I met David. So that's the background that David comes from, hard background. And we loved David, and he was a nice kid. One time, when he was about 14, I brought him home. And this is very unusual, but his mom was having a party. And I walked up to the house with David, and there were a lot of people in the house. I said, David, is this okay? And he said, yep. So I went down to my car, and I was about ready to pull away. And David came bursting into the car and said, they're doing drugs in the kitchen. I told my mom not to hang out with those people. I can't go back there. I can't go back there. So I brought David home with me, and he stayed at our house for a week. And we finally connected with social service and tried to figure out what's the solution here. So I talked to the social worker one day, and I said, please go pull a UA on the mom. She will fail, and then put David in my house for as long as David needs to be in my house. Could be 1 year, could be 2 years, could be graduate from high school. It didn't matter to us. We would like him with us until his mom is healthy. And maybe you've heard of this answer from a social worker before, but she said that unless there was physical abuse, they couldn't do anything, and they wouldn't do anything. So I was forced then to go to David and say, David, the only thing that can happen here is something that you want. If you want to come to our house for as long as you want to stay, we would love to have you. Go to schools in our school district as long as you need to be there. David said, okay, I'm going to go talk to my mom. So the next day I met David at a McDonald's across the street from his middle school. And he said, my mom said I can come. She said, I can come. And he said, but she said, if you go, don't come back. If you go, you're not my son. So, if you're 14 years old, and even if you know the situation's not good, you go to mom. You go back to mom. So that was a moment that I'll never forget, and it could have been different, I think, but it wasn't different, and I'm not sure why. But, David went back, and he found himself in the same circle of issues that many in this community do. And it was a sad, sad moment for us, for my family, and for me.
I invite you to stay standing if you wanted, but what has been the hardest thing for you as you've continued to love David?
I think that anyone in that situation would really think that if you're around a different circumstance, if you can witness people who love each other and a family that loves each other, and you can just witness this happen, that it would be different for him. And I don't know why it wasn't different for him. It hasn't been different for him, and that's the hardest thing. Of course, you're trying to expose someone to a different way of life, and it didn't work. And you'll regret that and wonder, should you have done something different all the way along? But I've never regretted being involved. I've never regretted having done it, or that was a waste of time, or it was a relationship not worth it. It was definitely worth it.
And my last question for you, Phil, is how have you been able to share the love of Jesus with David?
There's probably a lot of ways that we were able to do that. David has been in and out of prison, to our knowledge, 3 times. Just recently, Sharon and I went to pick him up in Faribault. Got some letters from him and a phone call, and needed a ride home. And we've done this several times over the last 5 years. So we always take that call. I guess we could say, I don't think it's going to be any different. I'm not going to come. But we went to buy him clothes. We went to pick him up. We had a great start to that. And it seemed like he had his mind around something different. And in the end, it didn't work out that way. We haven't heard from him in a while. And every now and then, Sharon will see some message on Facebook, and it hasn't turned out differently this time. But when David was probably about 16, when he began to get in trouble, I remember where I was when I asked him the question. I was on Highway 55, probably bringing him home after having been to jail or something, picked him up. And I said, David, do you ever wonder why I come back? Do you ever wonder why when you call, no matter what you've done, that I come back? Do you ever wonder that? And he said, I don't know, but I'd like to know the answer to the question. And I said, Jesus Christ gave me something that I'd never deserved, and that's unconditional love. So you will never be able to say, no matter where you end up, that no one loved me without condition, like Jesus loved us. So that's, I'm not sure what difference that could ever make with him, but he's going to know wherever he ends up that there was a family that always came back, that always answered the phone, and would always love him unconditionally.
Is there anything else you'd like to close comments with?
Yeah, I think that my relationship with David, I hope, is a relationship that adults and kids all can nurture in some way or another. What we do here with our youth is something like that. I get to sit with Jack over here. Jack's a great young man. I'm getting to know Jack. And hopefully you become one of many adults that Jack knows. And that at some point in his life, whether it's a joy or a sorrow, he's got someone that he knows that he can reach out to. I've got a number of young people in my life like that. I hope they would call me. One of them probably will, because they'll know that I'll answer the call. I'll always answer the call. I'll always go have coffee. We'll talk about what's going on in your life. So I like what the church does in trying to reach out and connect with young people. I think that's super important. So that's not just for adults, that's for kids as well. We talk about that this year in confirmation. Find people to reach out to, have relationship with, because you need it and they need it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Phil. Can I get a huge round of applause for Phil? Phil is someone who very obviously shows the love of Jesus. He reminds me of this guy named Joseph. Not Mary and Joseph. This Joseph was a first century Jew who became a follower of Jesus. And as he grew in his faith, the early church renamed him Barnabas. You guys know who I'm talking about now? You guys can laugh at me. It makes me feel better if there's laughter. Okay. So Barnabas means son of encouragement. Sounds like a good guy to have as a friend, right? And Barnabas was the first one to reach out to Paul after his conversion. All the disciples were still in Jerusalem. They were worried that Paul was faking and that he was going to put them in prison, so they wouldn't go near him. And Barnabas went out on a limb, and he goes and meets Paul, and he introduces him in Jerusalem, which ends up kickstarting Paul's ministry. So Barnabas earns a reputation for being someone who believes in people. Then Paul and Barnabas are called by God together to go out into the world and invite people to follow Jesus. And as they're getting ready for this road trip, they invite along John Mark, who is Barnabas' cousin. And depending on your translation, the Bible refers to Mark as their helper or their assistant. If you were present the last time that I spoke up front, I mentioned what I call the LCB, that's Leah's condensed Bible. I'm Leah. Okay. So my version of the Bible, in that version, Mark is the intern. So I relate strongly to the character of Mark. This trio sets out to share the gospel. Miracles happen, people become followers of Jesus, and then Mark leaves. The Bible tells us he went back to Jerusalem. But why? It might have been that Mark was afraid of being in some unfamiliar places. It could have been that he was convicted by seeing God at work. He might have left his stove on. All we know is that he left. This is my one-liner, and let me try that again. He could have left his stove on for all we know. Okay. But he left, and he doesn't give us a reason why. So Paul and Barnabas, they continue on their mission, they're building up the church, and they eventually return to Antioch, which is where they had begun their journey. So in Acts 15, which will be up on the screen, Acts 15 recounts, after some time, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back and visit each city where we had previously preached the word of the Lord to see how the new believers are doing." Barnabas agreed and wanted to take along John Mark. But Paul disagreed strongly, since John Mark had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in their work. Their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus. So, in this situation, I feel like it's easy to understand where Paul is coming from. He's done some hard work. He wants to continue in his mission. He invites along his best friend, who then says, well, let's bring along that guy who ran off in the middle of the mission trip. I would have a hard time getting on board with that plan. But let's look at Barnabas' point of view. He had reached out to Paul and become an influence on his life when no one else would come near him. And now Barnabas, all he wants to do is give Mark the same faith that he had given to Paul. He wants to give Mark a second chance. When Paul invited him back onto the mission field, he told Barnabas he couldn't bring his mentee. Which would you choose? I think that Barnabas made the hard choice in determining that his influence on Mark was more important than continuing in Paul's work. He looked at his personal gifting and the influence that he had on others and determined that his mission wasn't necessarily to go out to the ends of the earth, but to love the person that God had put right in front of him. In this case, it was Mark. So what about Mark? What's happening in his mind while this all plays out? It should be pretty easy for us to guess. We've all been Mark at one point in time. We've all been afraid. We've all made mistakes. We've all been hard to love. So imagine that this fight is happening over you. Which guy would you want as your mentor? I was thinking about a time when I've been like Mark. It's kind of hard to believe, right? I'm pretty easy to love. But I was thinking of my sister, Mandy. When I was in middle school, she was in high school, and we could hardly stand to be in the same room together. It was kind of fault on both sides. She would kind of borrow something from me without asking, and then I would throw some stuff around her room, and she'd shove me down the stairs, and I'm not holding a grudge. But she stepped up first. She started treating me differently with patience and kindness. She started putting me first. She realized that she had an influence on my life, and she used that to invest in me. And in so doing, Mandy led us into the loving relationship that we have today. And in this way, Mandy reminds me of Barnabas. And people who remind us of Barnabas are people that demonstrate the love of Jesus. Jesus outlines what love is for us in John 15. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Just look at what Jesus has done for you. Jesus showed us what love looked like by dying on our behalf. And as I listened to Phil's story, it became apparent to me that Phil, in many ways, has given up his life to show his love for David. He had given up of his time by meeting with David regularly, driving him back and forth from home. He gave up his space by opening up his home to David. And he gave up his comfort zone by inviting someone with a completely different background and different life problems to come and engage in his life. And I do not doubt that if it came down to it, that Phil would give his life for David in order to show the love of Jesus. So how can we act on Phil's example? How are we influencing people like Barnabas? Now, showing love for others will look different for each of us. For instance, by show of hands, students in the room, how many of you own a house? Me either. So it might be a little hard for you to open your home that you don't own to other people. So how you show love to others will be reflected by the gifts and talents that God has given to you. You might say that you show love in your own unique shape. Shape, yes, shape, the acronym from Sunday mornings. People come on Sundays here? Yeah? Okay. Since Jason is not here, I get to side with whom I want in the acronym battle. And let's face it, that Zach is the real boss anyway. So SHAPE, as it says on the screen, stands for spiritual gifts, heart, abilities, personality, and life experiences. So maybe you have the spiritual gift of teaching. This fall, we are launching in the CYF department an after-school program for kindergarten through 5th grade on Thursday afternoons. So if you have the gift of teaching, you could share a devotional with kids that would teach them about Jesus. Perhaps you have a heart for making people feel welcomed at school or at work or at extracurricular activities. You could invite someone into the fold that doesn't normally attend. If you have the ability to keep up with energetic kids, you could come and play a game with students at the after-school program. And if you have an extroverted personality, you might invite a large group of friends out to lunch and ask them how life is really going. If you're not extroverted, introverts in the room, you could maybe send a text or a meme or something that says, "Hey, I'm thinking about you." And if you have experience in tutoring kids, you should come tutor kids at, you guessed it, the after-school program. There are an infinite number of ways that you can reach out to those around you in love. From Phil, from Barnabas, from my sister Mandy, we see that we demonstrate the love of Jesus in our love for others. So how will you demonstrate that love this week? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for all of the students, all of the mentors, and every single individual who has passed into these doors and into these seats tonight, and I pray that they would be able to look out into the world around them and see who you have put right in front of them. Who is the mark in their life that they could show love the way that Phil showed us, the way that Barnabas showed us, the way that Jesus showed us, that we would be able to reflect you in the lives of others. And I thank you forever for the way in which you demonstrated that love for us in your sacrifice and the salvation that we can never repay.